Happy Friday. Hey, Josh, how are you doing?
Jens, back live and in action. Happy Friday indeed, and good to be back on another episode of the Reverse Mental Lab Fridays.
Yes, looking forward as well. It's good to be live again. Now, I was live yesterday, but we have had a couple of breaks in between, and now we are back, and then we do breaks again. That's just how it runs in this world in the moment.
Yeah, well, there's always a lot on the go, and it's also good to take a break from doing things sometimes, just to change things up a bit and things like that. And I know how much you love the live sessions because casting my mind back to a few episodes ago where you remarked in terms of you'd wish that you'd started doing live sessions earlier in your online video career. So it's good to be back live and looking forward to seeing what you've got lined up to discuss today.
Yeah, just to riff on that. But the good part is when you do live, everyone understands it's live, so you don't need to add too much. So it's less from the workflow perspective. So I'm just lazy. No, that's just a
Yeah,
small part of it.
I personally don't think it's lazy, and I think you just like putting yourself under a bit of pressure and almost feel like you're on a stage in front of a boardroom where you are actually presenting and you're not just talking to you and I.
Yeah, no, that's not too important to me, but it's we might reach two people more if we do it live because not everyone is subscribed to this fantastic podcast. But let's get into what we are talking today. Josh, tell us.
Yeah, cool. So sort of over the last 24 months, we've obviously learned to work in different ways and we've learned to work with different people, whether that be around the world, in different time zones or across different geographies and things like that. And when you think about how we've done that, one of the biggest things that we've done is we've learned to collaborate in different ways. And so, what we're going to be chatting about today is really the concept of working across different time zones, geographies, and enabling teams through asynchronous communication. And before we started recording today, Jens and I were just chatting about what does it mean to communicate asynchronously. And one of the things that we both feel is that the tools that we use to work and to communicate in this World Wide Web aren't quite at that level yet as in-person communication. So I'm excited to see what we come up with inside of this conversation today. But yeah, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I was just trying to get something into the chat, but I will do later when you speak. That's the fancy of the live show. For those who are not watching it
Yeah.
on YouTube or somewhere on video, you will even not notice that I'm looking somewhere else. So I do stuff, but agree. I think they're interesting parts of engaging over different time zones, geographies with different cultures, and in an asynchronous way. I think there's a lot to learn. I'm pretty sure because I've tried this when I was still in big corporate, and I was living in a different time zone than the headquarter, which was like 2 hours time difference. That's not too much, but then the teams have been spread across the whole globe. And how do you work with each other in a way that you don't demand someone answering right now when when you text or when you post something, let's say in a Slack group or even WhatsApp group, because we're in such an instant mode all the time. Everyone, I mean, not everyone, but most of the people that they think they need to answer directly to a WhatsApp that's coming in. And specifically in the work environment, that's super unhealthy if you directly jump into every email that's coming, into every WhatsApp, into every chat. So just this small piece is already interesting to explore. But of course, there are more topics to that. And I think we will cover, which I would like to cover. It's not just the time zone and the asynchronous, as well the geographical, which for me is then the part of how do you work with different cultures. Like, for example, I lived in different cultures, which is Germany, Russia, Sweden, and Denmark. All of these countries work differently in a digital and physical environment. And how do you curate it if you work across the different regions and countries? So yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, so sort of Jens, where I started my thinking around this whole thing was around the concept of context switching.
Yeah.
And when you think about context switching, and you already touched on it in terms of this digital environment that we're in. But from a context side of things, is if you think about in a physical environment, you go into a specific context. So you can go into a boardroom, or you go into a specific meeting, or you attend a meeting in a different part of the country. But from a digital environment, is it's very easy to context switch. And by that, I mean, it's very easy to keep your emails always open. And the first time an email comes in, okay, I must respond to that. Or I need to go from this meeting discussing this concept, and then an hour later, without any break, I'm in this meeting and I'm discussing this concept. And I think something that we need to think about is, how do we turn ourselves on and off, and how do we tune into those situations intentionally, but in a far more almost hyper-focused way, rather than just context switching from one thing to another without actually stepping back and realizing I'm going from this meeting discussing this topic, and then I need to be on tune and in par with the next meeting inside of that space. And I think a lot of people, when we went into this hyper-digitalized, super 2D environment that we now call home, a lot of people battled with that. And I think that while productivity has increased in certain areas, I think that still some people do still battle with that notion of context switching and being able to tune out of things.
That's my world. Now I've worked with that topics because I'm a super fan of the 4-hour work week, which is a lot about efficiency and how you do that. And I don't know when I read that book, and I even have no idea when it came out, but definitely before 2012, I think I read it first time around that. And I've worked with that topics the whole time because I 100% agree that if you're not focused, and your mind is wandering the whole time, and you do 5 things at the same time, your one thing is losing brain capacity. Like we talked about all the videos I've stored on my laptop, so the system is not able to use all the space in a proper way. And that's the same way for our brains. If you think on everything and do everything at the same time, you do literally everything at a 1% level, rather than doing one thing on a high focus mode and then really get things done. And I've built systems around that for the last, I don't know, 10-15 years, on how to do that, at least on an individual level, but I've as well worked with teams on that. It's super important because we're living in a world where you just get distracted. Like I was just touching my phone because I put it on flight mode, that nobody's disturbing us right now and I don't need to worry anything. And before we went live, I switched off everything, like you have seen. And that's just tiny things which are helpful things we can do to get into that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, just sort of taking this a step further now and talking about sort of this context switching, and one is time zones. So what does it mean to work across different time zones? And almost something that people have experienced, and some may have experienced this more than others, but is working across different time zones right around the world. And so one example that I'll put down is that's practical is daylight saving. So when the Northern Hemisphere switches between daylight saving, and I'm sitting in South Africa and Jens is sitting in Germany, I need to know what time it is. So when it's summer in Germany, it's the same time as it is in South Africa. But when it's winter in Europe and Germany in particular, Germany goes an hour behind South Africa. So I need to make sure that I'm scheduling meetings at the same time. And at the same time, I'm doing work with people in America who, if they're on Pacific or Eastern time, that's also a completely different time zone, and that's just inside one continent. And I think we've almost got to think about also not only what time we're setting those meetings at, but what frame of mind might people be in when they are entering that meeting. And I think that's a big thing that we've had to learn how to adapt to. And like I said, some people have really adapted to that well, while others have really struggled. And one of the things that I've really used to get my mind into that is to say, well, when are you working on certain types of things? So almost using this principle of time boxing and trying to be intentional about when you're working on things. And my biggest thing is to also realize that you can time box as much as you want, but sometimes there will be curveballs that come up, and you need to have the space and mental capacity to deal with those curveballs. Because if you don't, you're going to go backwards, because you're really going to think, shucks, I really set aside this time for writing, but now I've got to jump into this meeting or put out this fire and things like that. And I think that adaptability is also something that has allowed us work across time zones and geographies, which I'm sure we'll touch on later when you start talking about culture and things like that.
Yeah. Double clicking on the mental mode, that's the word I've wrote down. the and we have seen that. I mean, the both of us, we have been in different conversation. One extremes. So we have been in our time zone, and we have had business meetings with clients who have been sitting in Australia. For us, it was early morning. For them, it was late evening. And from a mental mode, just an example, we're drinking coffee like I do right now, and they're drinking wine on the other hand in a business meeting. Um, and that's also can give you a little bit of feel in which mental mode you are, and then people are in different ways of thinking, different habits. It's like I'm a morning person, as an example. Other people are evening people. um and then when you engage even in the same time zone, like for me it's no problem to do an early meeting, but for others it's no possibility. And then if you go just a country further or two countries further, like I will do in 3 weeks, I will be moving south. if if you and I will need to adapt to that because it's the local environment. If you live in Spain, it's not about early mornings. It's about the life is completely structured in a different way. We talked to the kindergarten yesterday, and they say the kindergarten starts at 9 o'clock. In Germany, that's not possible. Everything starts at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock work, 8 o'clock kindergarten, 8 o'clock school. So that's the timing here. So it feels like when we move to Spain, we will need to adapt to that, where everything will be an hour later. And evening, of course, is also an hour later. When you just from if we loop that a little bit to the culture aspect and take human, like, out of work experiences, if you go out in Spain in the evening, like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, which is slowly getting towards dinner time. In Germany, dinner time is at 6. But then you see the kids running outside at 8 o'clock, and small kids, because it's normal. That's just how it is. And here in Germany, every parent would look at you as like, what the fuck? Your kids should be in bed since 2 hours. Like, you are a bad
Yeah.
parent. Just having this points of view in that context, it's super important to understand that as well when you work in a global distributed environment, when you interact with people who are even in the same time zone but work in different cultures, or then across different time zones and work in different cultures. Being aware of that when you set up a meeting to say, hey, we need to do a stand up every day. If we just take that example, a stand up every day, what does it mean? And which time are you doing it that it is appropriate for everyone to contribute properly? Or do you not do a live stand up? Do you organize yourself that you do a virtual stand up and everyone can join that stand up in a way that it fits to their time zone, to their preferences, and when they're most tuned into that topic? And I believe we're still not there. I have worked across time zones the last 10 years, but I think the technology and the ways integrated in organizations, it's not there yet. We still need to work on that,
Yeah.
and myself included.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think about in this space, Jens, is thinking about this concept of moving between environments and context switching, but context switching in a physical way. And when we've worked across different time zones before, what we've done is that we've either gotten a plane or we've gotten a form of transport to move between different places. So we physically moved ourselves. But now we've sort of got this way to collaborate in this digital world. And yes, people have done it before, and we've had email for a long, long time. And by long time, I mean long time in our lifetimes, but actually in terms of technology, it hasn't been a super long period of time. But essentially, we've now got this way to collaborate in a far more digital native way. And that means that we can context switch through technology and using technology rather than having to do it in a physical way. And it's fascinating in terms of thinking through these things. I was having a conversation earlier this week about someone with the history of email and the history of the internet and the history of chat and where that all of those things came from. And if you think about the way that the internet was set up, it was really about this access point. And then people started saying, okay, well, how can I use the internet? And one of the things that I think that we need to think through now is we've got this environment that's developing around us. And yes, some people have, like yourself, have been working across geographies, across cultures and time zones for the last 10 years. But how now do we do that and make that more efficient using these digital tools that we have? And I think that that's where we've got now this access to do it. Now we really need to explore the utility side of things and actually saying, how do we grow that? How do we actually make it more efficient and more enjoyable? Because, to collaborate inside of a physical stand-up, to sit with that example for a bit, that's a far more creative experience for a team than to hop on a Zoom call every day for half an hour. And how do you think about designing that with intention and making it exciting and almost making it more human in the way that we connect and things like that? So I think we've still got a long way to go with those digital tools, but it's important just for us to think about those things and taking the concept of access. We've all got access to do it, but now what is the greater utility that we can build out with that for our teams, for our businesses, and for us as individuals as well?
Yeah. And I would like to go deeper into that. And designing that for me means designing that with the intention of that it fits to everyone, not the one who is, hey, I'm the corporate, I'm organizing this stand up and I'm in this time zone and it fits to my behaviors and lifestyle. So everyone need to obey to be there in that way and join that meeting if we still take that meeting. I think what we cleverly need to design that it fits to everyone who wants to contribute, everyone who is part of that community, that organization, that team, whatever it is. And that goes back as well, which we need to get a loop towards the generational exchange part. But it's, I think that's now the bridge. If you're a young 16, 17, 20-year-old person, you're working in a completely different way, you're thinking in a completely different way, and that's already visible in the physical context of physical organizations and meetings. And I think it's even triple the difference when we go into the digital world. I mean, I'm 41 next week. No, the week after. So close to 41. I haven't grown up with internet. I haven't grown up with mobile phones. I haven't grown up with anything of that type. The 18, 20-year-old people out there right now, as we call them, the young thinkers, that's their native language. All of them are most probably way more fluent in the language of digital internet, all of that technology than I am and I ever will be. But I'm still just 41. I know people, if we take, and we have talked about that, my mom, she's barely able to work with an iPhone and is using WhatsApp and this kind of things, but it barely works. If you take it to the next level, it's not going to work. And I think that's just the work environment where we are in. I I have a client who is saying, I don't have a laptop. I have a phone. If you want to work with me, you use your phone. He has not zero laptop, and that's for me
Mm.
just fascinating. If we just look at that, how do we collaborate in a global environment where we have so much different knowledge stacks and as well capabilities on how to use the technology?
Yeah. And that's sort of where, in my mind, at least, it sort of centers around this concept of asynchronous communication as the bridge. And last night we were both in a call in terms of this cohort that we're building out, and I was standing inside of that meeting, standing at a standing desk that I have, and thinking about what does it mean to communicate asynchronously, and how do you enable asynchronous communication? Because, for example, some meetings don't need to take place. So a lot of meetings happen for the sake of meeting and happen because people like to be with one another. So, for example, a lot of those discussions that we had inside of this specific meeting last night, I feel from a younger thinker's standpoint, could have been solved inside of a whiteboard, where you've got do's and don'ts on the one side, for example, pull that into a central discussion point and select your topic inside of that. And that can happen with inside 30 minutes. And then you start thinking about what does it mean to design an asynchronous environment and a digital asynchronous environment to take into consideration these different generations that are coming to work inside of that space. because the way that and the comfort that I have working with digital tools is far different to the comfort that an experienced thinker may have with those same digital tools. And you need to think about what does that mean in terms of when is the right time to set up an asynchronous style of working versus a synchronous style of working. And I think if you think about those mixes, there's no right or wrong answer, but you need to constantly be thinking about designing that space using a mix of both. Because if you don't use a mix of both, you also run the risk of purely having asynchronous collaborations, which means that sometimes you've got email threads going back and forth, which could sometimes be solved in a 30-minute phone call. And you also just need to think about what does that mean? When is the right time to do that? And what does that mean longer term in terms of building out relationships within inside teams and establishing ways of working? And at the core of it, trust is something that we've chatted about before. But that's just sort of a quick riff in terms of where my mind goes with how to bridge that gap in terms of ways of working together.
Agree. I think that's an amazing startup problem to solve, or an amazing problem for a startup to solve. So how can you solve that? Maybe we take that on in that group as well. Because I'm
Yeah,
just
so
thinking, if you're able
I've,
to find a way how to do that and how to scale that in a very large corporate, and you productize that and build a business model around that, it's going to fly. I'm pretty sure, because
yeah.
every
So
organization in the whole world has that.
I've got a friend who's got a startup problem that's addressing that, and they've been successful in raising some funds to try and solve that problem. And it's called Shepherd, and it's a business that's being built out currently. And again, it's really addressing this way of working and what do people need. So what are the comforts and touch points? Almost like reference points if you think about the way that offices and physical space were designed. And I think that almost when we think about designing things is sometimes we don't think deep enough and we don't think broad enough in terms of other or cultural reference points, which now ties to sort of working across different geographies, because inside different geographies you've got different types of culture, and inside of different types of culture you've got different key reference points that people have when they work or walk into a work environment. And what is the importance of being aware of that in terms of your language choice, or the timing of the meeting that you set up, or the time of the month that you set the meeting up? Because you also need to be aware of where people are at in order to get the best out of them when they come into a meeting. And sometimes I know that sort of I'm bringing a young thinker's perspective, and I know a lot of experienced thinkers think about these things a lot of the time. But in terms of bigger picture thinking, how does this scale, and what does this mean in terms of thinking differently in terms of the way that we're creating these spaces that we're going to work in, and definitely going to work in for the foreseeable future?
Yeah. I think that one of the books I shared earlier this week was around that, which is called Remote. What was the second line of the book? Let me check. Remote Office Not Required, from the founders of Basecamp. And that's a book that's already a couple of years old. So that was before all the pandemic happened. I don't even know. The book is, I guess, 10 years old almost. So it's quite interesting that they have set up a distributed organization on a global scale that's working like we describing right now. But also what I want to use that for is they work digitally first. Everything, they work in all the different parts of the whole world. So it doesn't matter where you live, you can work for that company. But important learning they have had as well, which they describe in that book, they have learned that they need to meet physically in between. So first, when they have been smaller, they did, I think, annual or biannual, like twice a week, twice a year, meetings where everyone of the whole company was meeting physically, where you build friendships, where you build culture, where you kind of get this physical part, and then they distribute it again. And now that they have been growing over the last 10 years, they have split that into regions. So the smaller regions, for example, Europe, all the business people of Europe are meeting at the spot, and then they're spending time to work with each other for, I think, 1 or 2 weeks per year, and all paid by the company, because they have understood that if you only do digital, it's not working. If you only do physical, in their space, in their philosophy of how they have set up their organization, it's also not working, because they have understood that if you want to work with the best talent in the world, it doesn't work that you bring everyone to you, because there are people who are smart. They're maybe from a skill set and cultural aspect, the people you would love to work with, but they don't want to move from, let's say, Germany to Silicon Valley, uh, because of family reasons and so on. But why do you exclude them? And I think that's it's a very really fascinating book, and I highly recommend everyone to read it. It's not too big. There's as well an audiobook version, and I have no affiliation to that. But I'm just fascinated because I love the topic, and I love the possibilities you can create with that. And now that we're 2 years in a pandemic state somehow worldwide, it's more important than ever that we understand how that works, and they have fairly simple concepts on how to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's fascinating in terms of what this means from a development standpoint, and like going back to those two words of access and utility. It's one thing to have access to these forms of asynchronous communication or access to global talent, but what does it actually mean to use that? And what is the utility standpoint and utility stack that's built out from these now different resources than we had or had thought of 2 years ago? And I think in terms of the way that we build and how we operate going forward, we need to think quite carefully around what does it mean to build out a company that's got global access? Or what does it mean to build out a company that's got a digital first base? And like Jens so well put, is companies like a Basecamp and others have already to walk that path. And I think now you've also seen around how big companies like Apple, for example, have taken quite firm stances about wanting to bring their employees back into a physical environment. And they're also towns like in America where Miami is developing into this hub and almost drawing some of the talent from Silicon Valley. And I also think in terms of this concept of across geographical boundaries, is geographical boundaries are already just being broken down into more time zone boundaries now, because people are realizing, hey, it's easier to collaborate across geographical boundaries in a digital way if I've got the same time zone bound, bearing in mind 1 or 2 hours ahead or after and things like that. I think that's potentially what we're going to see in the next little while, is people really looking, hey, I'm happy to hire remote as long as you're in the same time zone, because then it means that I'm taking one step towards a different type of communication, but I'm not breaking all the constructs that I've already, or inside of an organization that's built up over the last 10 years, for example.
Yeah. The tricky thing, and I think that's also things we need to work on, and that applies in the same way to all the what's happening in Web3 and crypto and so on, because I'm already looking into that from the start. I've created my company in the form of Basecamp. That's why I'm so fascinated about that, which is a distributed organization first. So everyone who is working with me is not in an office. I don't have an office. I have this room, and we'll have a different room in 3 weeks, but that will stay like this, because I truly believe I don't need an office just to show up. Hey, I have a big company logo in front of a nice office block or whatever, um, because I don't care about that. There are other things that are more important. But the point I'm after is more about what we need to find out, and that's hindering me in a lot of things. If I want to employ someone, like getting a person onto normal payroll inside of my organization, which is a German company, if we take the legal part, it's a German GmbH. It's very hard to employ someone who is not living in Germany due to the legal legislation stuff and regulations we have in Germany. And then it's a little easier when they're Europeans, but then it's still, if they don't live in Germany, it's very, very hard to get something done. But even worse when you do something outside of Europe. Like if I would need to want to hire you and put you normal on the normal payroll of my legal entity, it's not working. No chance. So I think there are a lot of constructs from a legal country perspective that holds companies back to do that in a proper way. And that's just one of the examples. I have more examples than that. because it's the same for if I work with a company and need to send an invoice to the US, it's super hard and super complicated. My tax accountant's freaking out if I'm working with someone outside of Europe because they are
Mm.
not used to that. They don't work with international companies where that's happening every day. So I think there's a lot to be done on that.
Yeah, and I know we're coming up on time, so I'm gonna resist the urge to sort of respond to a lot of the teasers that you've put out, because I've got some quite strong views around the way that political structures and tax structures are created and have been created, and I think that they totally need to be reimagined in terms of what the future holds, in terms of the way of work, and also allowing talent to work together. And if those talent companies and those tax structures aren't reimagined, I think that the best talent in the world are simply going to move, and they're going to
Yeah.
move to a place that's more friendly for them to work cross collaboratively, and also to work on projects that actually excite them, because at the end of the day they are really talented individuals and they've got great minds.
Yeah. Vanna was just sharing a point. Thank you very much, Vanna, as well, for watching live. I know you're busy. There's a company filing in that gap already, remote.com. They hire the people for you. So I will check that out. But I'm not sure if I want to have a middleman, to be honest. But that's a different thing.
Yeah, well,
Saving
we've
cost.
got some solutions. We've got some solutions for that, and yeah. So Jens, I've sort of enjoyed the conversation today, and it's been interesting to see where we've taken it. And maybe to wrap up in true reverse mental lab style is to say, maybe what is the one thing that we've enjoyed working asynchronously over the last few months, and what is the one thing that we've missed from working synchronously with people?
Yeah. What I enjoyed is I can go running after lunch or whenever I want, or biking or whatever. Not right now because it's fairly cold here. But that's maybe as well the nature of being an entrepreneur and have my own company and not a boss who tells me I need to be there. But that's, I think, it's a benefit. I can work in an asynchronous way and work at the time when I like to work, when I am at my best, and as well fitting that into the family frame, where I said, morning I want to work, then I take care of the family as soon as they wake up, then I get to work again. That wouldn't work in the normal way. But what I'm missing in the synchronous, and that's more the physical environment of it, and I've seen that, and I spoke about that as well in one of the former episodes when I was meeting people again in the first physical meetings and workshops I've been doing this year. It's so different, the culture you build, and I was knowing this people already from a digital environment, but then you meet them in person. You have for in my case a paella evening with them. You have a couple of wines and you enjoy the whole evening on top of the business part. Or like with Dennis, I was driving with him 15 hours to Sweden, and we haven't seen us for 2 years, and we spent 15 hours talking nonstop and have had fun. I think this kind of things I miss in the not synchronous way. What about you?
Yeah, so I'll just sort of start off by saying really what I've enjoyed the use of time. So I've been able to think about how I use my time at a far more deeper level, rather than having to have it dictated by going from meeting to meeting. So I've been able to context switch in a digital way, which has made it far more enjoyable for me. And it's also meant that I've been able to utilize in between times differently than I would have had. So much the same as you. The one of the things that I've sort of missed is this concept of serendipitous interactions. So I wrote a bit about this a few months back, and I think that I've intentionally tried to recreate that in the digital world, but it's an ongoing experiment. I haven't quite got it right yet. I've thrown myself into some conversations where I've definitely been way out of my over my head in terms of competencies and things like that. But I've done it intentionally to see if you can recreate these serendipitous interactions and serendipitous meeting opportunities that we once had when you went to a cocktail party, or you were walking down to a train station or something like that. So I think that that's one of the things that I've missed. And like I said, I'll let everyone know how those experiments go, but we'll see how and what the next year has in store for us.
Yeah. wrapping it up, talking about next year. This was the last reverse mentorship Friday this year, right? So I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
next week I will be in the
yeah,
US. Um, if anyone is in Boise and want to meet me in person, let me know. I mean, if you see or watch this later on or listen to it in the recording, then it's too late. But and then the week after is already Christmas, and then it's New
mm.
Year, and then it's like next year. Crazy.
Yeah, so you can come drop onto our podcast feed on your
Yeah.
favorite podcast player, and there'll be a little message about what we've got lined up for the next few months and early 2022. But Jens, it's been awesome to get into the flow with Reverse Mental Lab, and looking forward to seeing where we take it in the next 12 months. And thanks to everyone who's tuned in and supported and feedback and things like that. It's really appreciated. And hopefully we'll have a few more, maybe some interesting guests. I know that Vanna, we can rope him onto some live shows when he's got some time, and would be good to see and how we can experiment with that in early 2022.
Yeah. Same from my side, Josh. Thank you very much. It's always a blessing to learn from and with you and meet you. And I'm looking forward to meet you in person in 2022. We're definitely going to make that happen, even if I need to swim to South Africa from Spain in the future. Thank you very much, everyone. Wish you a great end of the year and see you next year again in the Reverse Mentorship Friday Live or whatever we were having up. See you and bye.